If you've been around NorthField long, you know that we've been in a series that in the Beatitudes, and I've kind of stepped out of that for the time I was in Israel in these 2 weeks, and we're going to jump back in mid-October back into the Beatitudes. But our small group have started a series called I Said This, You Heard That. It's all based on the way that we communicate with each other. And this study will lead you through a set of questions that will not only tell you a little bit more about yourself, but tell you about the way that God created you. And while that piece of knowledge is beneficial, equally important is to help you understand how God created the other people in your life. And maybe specifically as you go through this material as a group, how God created the other people in your group. You know, if you are in a small group, there's always somebody in every small group that talks and talks and talks and talks and won't shut up. Everybody has those people, you know. It will help you understand why those people do that and why there are those people in your group that never talk. While there are some people in your group who for their birthday would love for you to take them to that favorite Mexican restaurant and for your birthday put a hat on your head and smear whipped cream on your face and sing in a language that nobody can really understand. Happy, happy birthday to you, while other people in your group will hate you forever. Should you ever do that to them? While some of you love to sit on the front row and some of you love to sit on the back row. While some of you jump at the chance to serve in the nursery. And while some of you run when you see the nursery volunteer sign-up crew coming. It will help some of you parents discover why some of your children go to bed on time and why some of your children go to the bathroom for the 5th time at the time they're supposed to be in bed and then need to get 4 glasses of water. Why some of them can't wait to do their homework and why some of them say they never have homework. Wives can help you better understand why the man you married only grunts when he gets home. And husbands, it may help you understand why she gets so frustrated when you give her those one-word caveman grunts. And as important as understanding more about how God created you and the people around you, and as important as understanding more about the whys or why we act or why we respond the way we do, the study actually has the potential to help you discover what God created you to be. You see, I believe that we were created for more than what we often get. We as individuals and we as churches, created for more than the status quo. Created for more than breaking even. Created for more than just sitting on a fence. Created more than just going to work to buy a house or to upgrade that house or new countertops in that house. More than just getting a new phone and then upgrading the new phone. More to just building something for retirement to one day buy a cemetery plot and all go back to the dust. You see, I think there is something that God uniquely put in each of us that wants to know that He created us and He created us uniquely and for a purpose. A verse that we're going to talk about that comes up all through today and really the rest of this study is from the book of Ephesians. And it's where Paul says, for we are God, say that word with me, masterpiece. You are not a carbon copy, that you are a masterpiece. And get this, say this with me. He has created. Who has created? God has created. You see, if we're not careful, we will begin to buy into the lie that our culture teaches that we are just the random accident of a man and a woman who got together. But he says, I want you to know, you are more than that. That it might have been a man and a woman that got together, but that's as far as they took it. Everything else after that happened because I wanted it to happen. God says, I created you anew in Christ Jesus so that you can do the good works that you planned. Who planned? That God planned for us long ago. He says He has created. And why? So that we can do the things He planned for us. Have you ever made something that was special to you? As a parent, I remember our kids going to school and them being young and getting things. And those things that they make, they become special to you, don't they? You show it off. You brag about it. You hang it on the refrigerator. We didn't do it back then because I don't remember even having all these things that we have today. But now you post it on social media, what your kids do. I remember one time, Alana, she was young. I don't know. 1st, 2nd grade, somewhere through there. And she had made this little thing that she came home with, and she showed it to me, and I didn't even really know what it was. Have you seen it? It's made of paper, and you do this with it, and she had wrote little questions on it, and then you say some words and a little chant, a little la, 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 and then you get to the one, you pull it open, and you read what's on the other side. Well, she loved to write the craziest little things on that. Well, since I didn't know what to do with it, I had to ask her, because she was the creator of that. I had to ask her, well, what do you do? How do you do this? Well, she started making ones for me. First ones she made for me were so tiny that I couldn't get my fingers up under the little thing. So I had to say, you got to make it a little bit bigger, honey, for me. So she makes it bigger. And then as we're going on trips, I remember those early years, first and second grade, that she would have me write crazy little things on the other side of those things so that we can go down the road. And we would do this, and this. And when it got time, and I would either open it early, or I would open it too late, or I would forget, and she would laugh, and then we would say something. But there was something special about something that she had made. And if you go in, I've got this little box that sits in the closet. I've still got 2 of those little things to this day that I saved because it was special. The good news, Paul said, is that God created you, and he created me with a purpose. Listen to what Solomon says in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 16, verse 4. He says, the Lord has made what? Who all does that include? Does everything include? Everything. For his own purpose. You see, oftentimes, again, we begin to bind the culture that God created us for our purpose. That God created us for what Tom wanted to do in life. Or God created Linda for what Linda wanted to do in life. God says, that's not right. You're going to have frustration. If that's your mentality, if you are out there looking for what you want to do, then you're going to miss it. The reality is this. He says the Lord has made everything for his own purpose. Not for my purpose for me or your purpose for you, but you and I were created for his purpose, his plan. In other words, if you're breathing, if your heart is ticking this morning, that means that God has a purpose for your life. You are not here by accident. You did not just show up. You have a divine appointment to be where you are, to live where you live, to work where you work, to go to school where you go to school, to walk down the streets that you walk on, to take the trips that you go on, because he has divinely appointed us. We have these heavenly appointments to meet up with people. You see, you and I were created for his plan. And what I want you to leave here today with is this. No matter where you are in life, I want you to leave here knowing that God created you, he knows you, he loves you, and he has a plan for your life, even if you haven't discovered what that plan is yet. There were a group of us who just got back from Israel. If you were in that group, you know it took several hours for us to get there. We stayed in airports quite a while on the way, and most of us were in airports between 30 and 36 hours on the way back from the time we got up this morning to the time that we landed back here in Nashville. And I noticed something sitting at the airport. God made a lot of different people, didn't he? And as I'm sitting there, I think, and people wired in so many ways. Have you ever just sat and looked at people? Like, I looked at a person one time, and I won't tell you man or woman, but I thought, what in the world possessed them to get up this morning and put on those black leather, whatever they had on, and think that looked good? I mean, I'm in my mind thinking, was there nobody in their life that loved them enough to say, honey, you are bubbling out everywhere, all of us created different, but you don't have to go to an airport to see that. You can come here and see that sometimes. I don't know why I said that. Forgive me. We cannot put this sermon forever online. If you look around, you know that everybody is different. Every tree is different. Every plant is different. Every animal is different. You can even take trees and plants within species of trees and plants, and while they look the same on the outside, and while they have the same name, maple or oak or whatever it may be, they are so different shapes, different sizes. There's no one like you in the entire world. Did you know this? Even identical twins are not really identical. In a cubic foot of snow, scientists tell me there are 18 million snowflakes, and not one single snowflake is like the other. Who but the experts would even know that? Except for God, who liked variety. He could have made us all alike. He could have put us in a factory where he had an assembly line and we were on a conveyor belt and we go off and here's a head and here's an arm and here's this, and we all look the same, act the same, speak the same, have the same hair color, have the same eye color, but he didn't want to do that. You know why he didn't want to do that? Because an original is always better than a copy. Do you realize an original you is always better than the copy of someone else. It's why you need to stop yourself when you hear yourself saying, well, I wish I could be more like, fill in the blank. Because every time you wish to be stronger, bigger, smaller, whatever it is, then you're wishing away what God uniquely created you to be. And God says, you are valuable, Tom. I created you. My son died for you. My spirit lives in you. You matter. You are not just 1 in a million. You are not even 1 in 7.8 billion. Look at Genesis 2, verse 7 with me. And then the Lord God, and he's speaking of the creation of that first man and that first woman. Then the Lord God formed. You know what that word formed is? It is shaped. It really has the same thing as that if you're a kid. Did any of y'all have Tinker toys growing up? You know, you put those together, you build them, you shape whatever it was. It was really the first Play-Doh. It was dirt dough, though, whatever you might want to call it. He says God took that and he shaped, he formed something. So you get how the image of a man is formed. He shaped a man from the dust of the ground. And then here's the second word I love. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. You know what that breathed into means? It means he put his image inside of you. It was more than just breath that went into your lungs. That whole phrase there, breathed into you the breath of life, is that you got a life that came from him, that running throughout your veins is more than the product of your mom and dad. But the greatest thing running throughout your veins is the product of your creator, that you were created in his image, and he breathed DNA into you. He custom formed you. And that word formed and shaped and breathed into, that image is all over Scripture. Maybe one of the most common or the most recognizable places if you grew up in church is Psalm 139. Listen to how David words this from the International Children's Version of the Bible. He says, for you created who? God created. Again, we may think it's our mom or dad, but he said it stopped with the sex act with them. I mean, they got together. They had a thing going on. But everything that happened past that, I did it, God says. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because you made me in an amazing and wonderful way. What you have done. Notice David never gives credit for the way God shaped and wired and formed him to his mom and dad. He gives credit to the God of heaven. What you have done is wonderful. I know this very well. Next verse, you, God, you saw my bones being formed as I took shape in my mother's body. When I was put together there, you saw my body as it was formed. All the days planned for me were written in your book. Guess when? Before a single one of them had come to pass. As this version says, before I was 1 day old. Notice David says, God made me. God formed me. God saw me. God shaped me. God knit me together, one version puts it, and planned every day of my life. The world may tell you that you are some random collection of biological matter that just came together and made a human being. But evidently our God thinks differently. Evidently, when God looks inside the womb of a mother, he sees a human being that he placed there. There are no accidental children. There may be accidental parents. There may be parents who never intended to be a parent, but let me tell you the miracle of creation is that God can take the results of a one-night stand, and while not condoning or approving of that one-night stand, he has the power, the might, and the ability to stamp his image on any child born in any situation, in any phase of life. You were made and stamped with the very image of God, regardless of your parentage. You may call yourself an accident, but God says, I beg to differ. Your parents may have initiated an act of togetherness, but God says, you make no mistake about it. I made you. I formed you. I shaped you. I put you inside your mother's womb, and I had a plan for you before you were ever a day old. You are no accident. Job 10, verse 8, Job, speaking of his creator, marks and really says the very same thing. Your hand, speaking of God, not my mama's, not my daddy's, Your hands shaped me and made me. And God says, you were not mass-produced, you were handmade, and I was involved every step of the way. I told them at first service, because Deb Anderson was sitting right over in this area, and I had several gifts when I went through cancer several years ago, and one of those, and they were all special, but one kind of stood out. One stood out because a lady had embroidered an entire song on a piece of cloth and made it into a quilt that reminded me of the wonders and the purpose that God has for us. And all of them are in my office, but that one sits in a place where I see it every day when I come in, and there was something special about her hands and how they knit it together. And God says, I made you. I made everything good about you that you like, and I made even those parts of you that you wish in a moment that you could change. And why did he go to all that trouble? I believe because he wanted someone who was just like you. And isn't it just like us? Because I spend a lot of my life wishing I was bigger, badder, whatever, more hair, less hair, red hair, blonde hair, taller, shorter. I want to be white, black, brown. But I wonder what it would do to our confidence that if every time we looked in the mirror, we saw someone that God created, and we could be reminded that in that moment that you are the way you are because God wanted someone just like you on this earth. Because when we start to think, I want to be like them, I want to dress like them, so I'll walk like them and act like them and talk like them, we begin to forget that we are a masterpiece on our own. And God made you because he wanted a you. In fact, he broke the mold, one writer wrote when he made us. And I was reading a book that looked at it, and it said it was where God created. And he says, if you look around, we really all look like a bunch of fruits. Some of us are a pear. And I was beginning to envision that, some pears. He said, some of us are an apple, some of us are an orange, some of us are cherry, some of us are a banana in there. And he says, with God, all his uniqueness, he made all of us different. Cool, perhaps, but off the wall a little bit, and just for fun, did you realize that 25 years ago, scientists believed that there were right at 350,000 species of beetles on this earth? Did you know that? Like, I know that's what you looked up before you came in here today, and you're wondering why in the world have I told you. Did you realize in the past 25 years, they have now increased that number, and scientists say that there are over 1 million species of beetles on this earth? You got your recently discovered beetles that are there. Then you got over 50,000 jewel beetles that are around there, I guess because they look like jewels. And then you've got over 70,000 different kinds of red beetles that are out there. And over 150,000 different kinds of black beetles that are out there, followed by your blue and your green and your yellow beetles, followed by, I can't even believe that that's a beetle, followed by 4 guys that were named the Beatles at one time. Thank you, Phil and Lexi, for putting that in for me today in there. And all of that, just in case you find yourself on Jeopardy one day and they ask, you can thank me later. Over 1 million species of beetles because God said, everything I created good and I created different. You would have thought 10 would have been enough, wouldn't you? Or 1,000 would have been enough. And as we said, 18 million different snowflakes in a cubic foot of snow, and not one of them the same. 7.8 billion people on planet Earth, and not one fingerprint on any of those fingers are exactly in his wonder. Isn't any wonder that David wrote what he did in Psalms 104, verse 24? How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom, you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. David knew that he had a purpose. And in fact, I love reading the Psalms because David knew he had a purpose even when no one else in his house believed that he had a purpose. If you remember the story, the prophet Samuel had come to the house of Jesse to anoint one of his sons the next king over Israel. And so Jesse brings in 7 of his sons, from the oldest down to almost the youngest. And Samuel every time looks at them and goes, not the one, not the one, not the one. Don't you got any more? Don't you got any more? And he finally says to them, well, we got one, we got one. He's out in the field. Well, bring him in. And they bring him in. Even when his own dad didn't believe in his destiny and his purpose, he still had a purpose and a destiny before God. You see, sometimes we think God created us to live for us. It's the ultimate missing the point when you think God created us or you for you. We were created for His purpose. Perhaps you heard the story about the farmer who got a new hunting dog. He was so excited, he went out and he was going to go duck hunting with the dog. And he was hunting in a field, and on the other side of the field there was a pond. And so he happened to get a duck, but the duck flew a little bit, and the duck actually, when the duck fell, it landed in the pond. But that dog took off, but he thought, oh my heavens, the dog is taking off. He was calling the dog back, but the dog didn't come back. The dog went, and he watched in amazement as that dog ran straight across that water, just like he was walking on it, didn't hardly even got his feet wet, got the duck, brought it back and laid it at his side, and he thought, oh my, what in the world have happened here? Could I have possibly have seen what I saw? So this time he decides he's going to shoot another duck, and he waits, and he shoots it over the spot where this time the duck would purposely fall in the water. Dog does it again. Dog goes right out, goes right across the top of the water, doesn't even really get wet, comes right back, and the guy goes, oh, okay, one more time. I got to do it. He does it one more time. Same thing happens. He is so excited. He calls his buddy. He says, you got to come over here. You got to see something. It is absolutely incredible. So the buddy comes over. The farmer shoots the duck. Duck falls in the water. Dog runs out across the water, gets the duck, comes back. Dog is not even wet. Farmer looks to his friend and says, did you see that? Friend said, yeah, you're not really a great shot shooting those ducks over the water. And that dog of yours, he can't even swim. It's the ultimate missing the point. God says, I created you for my purposes, and until you find that, you'll always be frustrated. I had someone ask me, now, is this small group study we're doing, is it a spiritual study? I would say that the study could be one of the top spiritual things you could do in your life. To take a few weeks and look at how God uniquely created you and wired you. Solomon, one of the wisest men, or said to be the wisest man who ever lived, wrote the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. And in the book of Proverbs, he wrote these words, and I'm going to read it from the King James, since most of us probably in the room grew up hearing it in the King James language. It's Proverbs 22, verse 6. Solomon says this, train up a child in the way he should go. Notice those words, he should go. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, if you grew up like I did, that verse was used a whole lot to talk about discipline. You should discipline your kids. You should teach your kids this. You could teach them right and then teach them the wrong way to do that. And while you should do that, did you know that this verse is not talking about disciplining your kids? It's not even speaking of training your kids in the way that we generally think of training our kids. Let me read this verse from a newer translation and see if maybe we together begin to get the point that Solomon is saying. From the ERV version, teach children in a way that fits their needs. From the Darby translation, train up a child according to the tenor of their way. Did you know that back before Myers-Briggs, back before DISC or SHL or the Enneagram, there was Solomon who, when writing the words God would inspire him to write, reminded us that every child has a way about them that is different than every other person on the face of the earth. I've told you many times, those of you who have been here may be sick of this saying that, but if you have multiple children, you know one thing. One child comes out saying, how can I help you? Another child comes out smoking a cigarette saying, what will you do for me today? I mean, they're wired completely differently. And although I think you should take your kids to church, Solomon isn't saying train up your children to go to church and when they're old, they'll still go to church. That's not what he's saying. Solomon is saying that every child has a unique personality and a unique temperament. And if you want to teach them something that will last their entire lifetime, you help your child discover who God created them to be and not who you want them to be. You help your child discover the way they have been uniquely wired by God, the reasons they do what they do, the reasons they think the way they think, the reasons they respond the way they respond. You teach them those things, and Solomon says you'll have something that your child will take to the grave with them because it's the way God created them. It's why I say if you have influence in the life of your child, especially your own, one of the most spiritual things you can do for them is to spend a few hours next Sunday afternoon gaining some tools, putting some things in the toolbox that will help each of us relate better to a new generation. You see, if you try to make them you, if you expect them to reason the way they reason, to think the way you think, to respond, to behave the way you behave, without understanding the way God uniquely rewired them, they will be frustrated all the days of their lives. But when you teach them how God wired them and how to respond and what God has for them, you will give them a gift that will last through eternity. And helping us discover who God made our children to be. See, my children are grown. And I look back over my life and, I try not to live with regrets. And there's a whole lot of good that happened. But there are moments that I look back and I understand now better why arguments happen when arguments didn't have to happen. Tense moments that I went through with some of them. The times I spent wondering why in the world they acted or responded in the way that they did. And I've often wondered how much better of a dad I could have been if I had had the opportunity that we are giving each of you. Because I intend on going. Because I intend on putting these things into practice in the lives of my grandson now. It's part of that train up your child in the way that he should go or she should go with their temperament and personalities. And in your families, you encompass this great spectrum. Where does all that diversity come from? Except in God's great design. And from the bottom of my heart, if you hear me say anything today, hear me say this. Great parenting and great stewardship of the next generation is not only discerning the personality and the temperament differences in our children, but affirming them and even celebrating them. How powerful would it be in the lives of some of our maybe young daughters who are maybe not as extroverted, maybe they're a little bit shy, and you're that mom who has been fiercely competitive, and you're a go-getter, and you're that personality that's out there. How much you could help them bring out the image of God on their life if you could understand why God made them the way they are instead of trying to make them more in the way that you are. Or you dads out there that may be those ever-loving sport, go this, run can do anything with the ball that a ball could do, and yet you've got a son or a daughter who can't do everything with the ball or doesn't want to do everything with the ball. If you could somehow look into the lives of them and figure out who God made them to be. All of those things going together. We have a choice. And as I've grown and begun to understand the wonder of my God, I realized that God doesn't mass produce anything. And if I could teach our children and the next generation in this church anything at all, if they came out of here knowing that they were God's masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus to do good works from before the time they even exited their mother's womb, it would be a win. All of us. God creates nothing that doesn't have value. Even one of the reasons I love having to celebrate recovery in our building is that it reminds me every week that even the times we mess up the masterpiece that God created, that He is still about redeeming and restoring. And if He can create and shape and put His image of me, stamping on me while I'm still in my mother's womb, don't you think He can do it after that too, in the days of our lives now? I'm going to close. Now, don't get too excited, because if you've been here long, you know that could mean another 15 minutes. But anyway, it means all of this has led to this. I would like to close just talking a little bit about you and a little bit about me. James, he's the half-brother of Jesus, and he writes in his book called James, he says, and he compares our lives to a mist. And I found on Stephanie Harding's Facebook page a mist that she saw looking out her window one morning, and how it's just there. And he compares your life to the beauty of this mist that's there for a little while, but he says, then the sun comes up and it fades away, here for just a little while, but then gone. But James goes on to say, make no mistake about it. Although your life is like a mist or like a vapor, I think some of your versions will say, he says, you are the first fruits of everything God created. He goes on to say that you and I are marked by majesty, that we have been created in the very image of a creator who breathed out the stars and flung them into place. That you and I are shaped together, that we are formed, that we are knit together, that we, as David said, have been fearfully and wonderfully. That word fearfully and wonderfully comes from a word, a Hebrew word that actually means you have been distinctively set apart for a specific purpose. You are somebody special. And you know how you came about, don't you? I mean, this is not supposed to be a biology lesson, but just in case somebody didn't get through the fourth grade or sixth grade or whenever they teach it, it started out like this. There was a cell from your daddy and a cell from their mama. And one cell went on a journey to find, from your dad went on a journey to find a cell from your mama. In fact, it was a whole lot more than one cell from your daddy. It was more like this. It was like 100 million cells from your daddy. It's because nobody asked for directions. I'm convinced that's that's what happened there. And you know, anything about biology, you should applaud that one little cell from your daddy because it went through a lot of work. I mean, it was the original Top Gun. It had to go through a lot to get to its destination. It was the maverick of its day, and it found its mama eventually. And there's a little more to it than that, but that's as complicated as we're going to get right now. And this one cell from your dad got together with that one cell from your mom, and that one cell from your dad was carrying 23 chromosomes that came from him, and that cell from your mama was carrying 23 chromosomes that came from your mama, and they merged those 23 chromosomes. They hooked up together when they found each other, and they began to form a very unique DNA that was God-stamped your image. And did you know that one little cell that you started out as, half from your mom and half from your daddy, it contained what scientists now say 3 billion. You can't even see it with your naked eye, but it contains 3 billion distinctively, uniquely characters that spell out all the things that make you, you. And in that one little cell, scientists say that if you took them all out and stretched it out, it would be about 6 feet long. And if you tried to read the DNA in one cell of your body, it would take you 96 years speaking a letter every day and every night for 96 years just to read it. And then that cell did the unthinkable. It went out and divided and made another cell. And then it divided and made another cell. And then it divided and made another cell. Until the day that you were born, they say you had approximately 37.2 trillion cells in your body. And here you are when you were actually born into this world. I got a picture there. That may not be you, but maybe you can think of it as you. But if we back up before that date, 9 months before that date, you may not recognize it, but here's a picture of you at just 3 days after you were conceived. There you are. By the third day, that one little single cell had become 16 cells. And they gathered them together on the head of this pen. And the only reason you can see it today is because it has been magnified 50,000 times its original size. You were tiny, but you had worth and you had value. And by the third day, that one little cell had turned into 16 cells on its way to making the 37.2 trillion cells that make you, you. And those 37.2 trillion cells each contained 8 billion different little character codes that made you uniquely you. And if you stretched out all of that DNA and you started at 2100 Nashville Pike or wherever it is that you live, and you wanted to go, you know how far it would go? Scientists say it would stretch from where you are to the moon 176,914 times. All inside that body that you call you. And by the way, if you're tired today, you have good reason to be tired, because just every second that you live, you know what else happens? Over 3 million of those cells die. Only to be replaced by 3 million more cells that take their place. You've been busy out there. You didn't even know you were busy. You thought you were listening, but you've been dying and coming back to life. And here you are. If we want to go a little bit further, here you are at 20 weeks old, just hitting that 5th month, still in your mother's womb. You remember those days? Those were the good old days. I mean, nothing to do but float in this jacuzzi-like place where we were, and the water was warm, and just chilling out there with not a thought in the world, not worried about anything. And miracles are happening every second, even before you were born. Could I tell you about one that happens between here and here? Did you know that while a baby is still in its mother womb, that's 20 weeks. If you were to back, even go earlier to 7 weeks old, do you know that the main parts of the eye are already formed? And that by 10 to 12 weeks, your eye has everything it needs to see? Your eye is almost completely mature inside there at 10 to 12 weeks. And all of your eyes are connected to your brain by this one little stalk that goes up beside there. And in that stalk, before you're born, will become a little housing that your optic nerve goes up to. And somewhere about the 10 to 12th week, 1 million, they tell me, little nerve endings will leave your brain. And they'll start traveling. And they'll start traveling down that little stalk that's there. And at the exact same moment, 1 million little nerve endings will leave your eye, and it will start traveling up that stalk. And somewhere in the middle, those 1 million little nerves from your brain will have only one exact match out of all 1 million nerve endings from your eye. And in a moment that can only be described as but God, every single one of them find their exact match. And in that moment, you could see. Oh, but you really couldn't see, because you could see, but your eye has got this little covering on it there to kind of protect it. And you can see shapes and you can see all of these things, but if that little covering wasn't there, you'd be set to go. But somewhere around 24 weeks, in a way that they really can't even explain to this day. You can try to Google it and find it, but there's so many different opinions on how it happens. Again, I say it's but God. Somehow miraculously about that 24th week, that little eyelid forms a perfect little cut across it, and you blink and you open, and for the first time you have eyelids. And your retina that's back behind that eye, it contains 127 million cells in it. That if you stretch them from end to end, they would go around the circumference of the earth, not once or twice or 3 or 4 or 5, but 5.8 times, allowing you and allowing me to see 10 million different shades of color every second the clock ticks. For you are fearfully and you are wonderfully made. And the God of the heavens, the one who fashioned you together, he knows your name. He knows everything about you, and he loves you. I love what Max Lucado wrote, and that's how we're really in today in his book, Cure for the Common Life. He wrote these words: Da Vinci painted one Mona Lisa. Beethoven created only 1/5 symphony. And God made only one version of you. You're it. You're the only one the world gets. And if the world doesn't get you, well, then we don't get a you. You're the only shot we have at you. You can do something no one else can do in a fashion that no one else can do it. You are more than a random coincidence of chromosomes and heredity, more than just an assemblage of somebody else's lineage. You are uniquely made. But can you really be anything you want to be? If you are uniquely made, maybe think about it. If you're uniquely made, can you really be anything you want to be? If you don't have the sense that takes care of numbers, can you really be an accountant? If you don't have a love for dirt, can you be a farmer? If you don't have an appreciation and a devotion to kids, can you really be a teacher? Well, I suppose you can be an unhappy one, an unsatisfied one. You can be one of the 87% of the workforce that really doesn't like their work. You can be a statistic. But Max ends with these comments. Can you be anything you want to be? I don't think so. But can you be everything God created you to be? Without a doubt. And you do know that you find that who you were created to be by discovering how and why God made you uniquely you. I pray that this study, in addition to showing you how red or green or blue or yellow you might be, my prayer is that it will help you to discover who God created you to be. And it may help you relate to those other people in your group that you sometimes have trouble relating to. And it may help you for those of you who have kids or grandkids or nieces or nephews, or if you're a teacher, you have kids in your class. It may help you better understand how to love them in a deeper, more meaningful, and perhaps even more spiritual way. Will there be verses in every study? Probably not. But I guarantee you this, the fingerprints of God are all over it. Father, I thank you for loving us. I thank you for creating us the way you created us. Father, I pray that you will be with us, that you will let every person here know in their heart of hearts that you love them, you are for them, that you created them, that you are formed them. Father, I pray that we will be a society who values life from the moment of conception. Father, we love you. I thank you that I'm not just the product of a mom and dad, but I am the product of your handiwork, that you stamped your image on me regardless of what any other human being might have done. I am yours, and by your grace, you are mine. And I love you for that. And the whole church at NorthField said,